I slumped onto the couch, utterly drained from the day's events. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, struggling to process Larry's bombshell revelation. As I stared blankly at the wall, his words echoed in my head like a broken record. I got Kara pregnant. We need to talk about a divorce, June. Those 9 words shattered the life I had known, sending shockwaves through my very core. Kara, my supposed best friend since childhood, had betrayed me in the most unimaginable way, by having an affair with my husband Larry. And now she carried his child, a living embodiment of their deceit. I couldn't help but let out a bitter chuckle as I remembered the envelope I had been safeguarding for years, the divorce papers I had prepared just in case. Little did I know that the day would come when I'd have to pull them out, not for my own protection, but because of Larry's unfaithfulness. Reaching into the drawer, I retrieved the envelope and slid out the crisp documents. With a deep breath, I handed them to Larry, whose expression was a mixture of shock and guilt. "Here you go, Larry," I said, my voice surprising me with its steadiness. "The divorce papers I've had ready for this very day." Larry's mouth hung open, rendered speechless by my preparedness. I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction in catching him off guard. "June, he began, but I held up my hand, silencing him. "Save it, Larry. You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. I won't be made a fool of anymore." I stood up, suddenly feeling a surge of strength and determination. This was the moment I had been bracing myself for. The moment when I would reclaim my life and leave behind the betrayal and lies. "Pack your things and get out," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. "I don't want to see your face again." Larry's eyes widened, but he knew better than to argue. He had played his hand, and now it was my turn to take control. As he gathered his belongings, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that the charade was finally over, and I could begin the process of healing and moving on. The door slammed shut behind him, and I was left alone in the silence. But for the first time in a long while, the silence felt liberating, not oppressive. I had taken the first step towards reclaiming my life, and nothing would stand in my way. In the days following Larry's departure, a heavy silence settled over our suburban Denver home. The once familiar surroundings now felt foreign, reminders of the life I had known slowly crumbling around me. As I navigated this new reality, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Larry's behavior in the weeks leading up to his confession had been odd, to say the least. He was constantly glued to his phone, typing away furiously at all hours of the day and night. Whenever I questioned him about it, he dismissed my concerns with a wave of his hand and a mumbled excuse about work. But I knew better. I had seen that kind of behavior before, back when my ex-boyfriend Alex had cheated on me during our college years. The secrecy, the lies, the constant need to be on his phone, it was all too familiar, and it had left me with a deep-seated mistrust that never truly went away. As I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the remnants of our once happy life, I couldn't help but flash back to those painful memories. The hurt, the betrayal, the overwhelming sense of not being enough. It all came rushing back, like a tidal wave crashing over me. And yet, even in the midst of my despair, a tiny flicker of anger began to burn within me. How could Larry, the man I had trusted with my heart and my life, do this to me? How could he so callously disregard the vows we had made, the promises we had exchanged? The more I thought about it, the more the anger grew, fueled by the realization that Kara, my supposed best friend, had been in on the whole charade. The two of them sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face. It was a betrayal so deep, so profound, that it shook me to my very core. I found myself replaying every interaction, every conversation, searching for clues that I had missed. Had Kara's overly friendly behavior towards Larry been a sign? Had her constant presence in our lives been a ploy to get closer to him? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. But amidst the hurt and the anger, a newfound resolve began to take shape. I would not be a victim in this twisted web of deceit. I would not allow myself to be cast aside like a piece of trash, discarded and forgotten. No, I would rise above it all, and I would make them pay for what they had done to me. Larry and Kara may have thought they had won, but they had no idea what was coming their way. This was just the beginning, and I was ready to fight, for my dignity, for my self-respect, and for the life I deserved. Just when I thought the betrayal couldn't sting anymore, life decided to twist the knife even deeper. Kara, the so-called friend who had slept with my husband and gotten herself pregnant, was moving back to town. The universe really did have a sick sense of humor. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. Surely, Kara wouldn't be brazen enough to rub her conquest in my face by settling down in the same town where she had destroyed my marriage. But as the weeks passed and her presence became more and more apparent, the truth became impossible to ignore. She was everywhere. At the grocery store, the coffee shop, even the park where I used to take leisurely strolls. Each time I saw her, a sickening feeling would rise in the pit of my stomach, a combination of rage and betrayal so potent that it threatened to consume me. And then there was Larry. My soon-to-be ex-husband, who had once sworn to love and cherish me, now seemed to gravitate towards Kara like a moth to a flame. Whenever I saw them together, a twisted sense of camaraderie radiating between them, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "June, you're being ridiculous." Larry would scoff whenever I raised my concerns. "Kara's my friend, too. There's nothing going on." Friend. The word left a bitter taste in my mouth. How could he be so blasé about the woman who had helped him demolish our marriage, our family? How could he not see the blatant disrespect in their constant togetherness? But Larry was blind to it all. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. Either way, his dismissive attitude only fueled the fire burning within me. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, stewing in my anger, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Kara standing on my doorstep, a sickeningly sweet smile plastered across her face. "Hey, bestie," she cooed, as if nothing had changed between us. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." I couldn't believe her audacity. This woman, who had betrayed me in the most fundamental way, had the nerve to show up at my doorstep, acting as if we were still the closest of friends. "Don't you dare call me that," I spat, my voice dripping with venom. "You're no friend of mine, not after what you did." Kara's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "June, come on. We've been friends forever. Surely you're not going to let a little thing like this come between us?" A little thing? I could feel my blood boiling at her callous disregard for the pain she had caused. "Get out," I growled, my fists clenched at my sides. "And don't ever show your face around me again, you lying, deceitful snake." With that, I slammed the door in her face, leaving her stunned on the other side. As I leaned against the closed door, tears of rage streaming down my cheeks, I made a silent vow to myself. I would not let them win. No matter what it took, I would have my revenge. As if the betrayal of my husband and supposed best friend wasn't enough, the universe decided to pile on even more misery. Larry's mother, Evelyn, had been struggling with dementia for years, and it had finally reached a point where she could no longer live on her own. Guess who got saddled with the responsibility of being her full-time caregiver? Yep, that's right. Me. Larry, in all his infinite wisdom, decided that I was the perfect person to take on this burden, despite the fact that our marriage was crumbling around us. And of course, when I protested, he played the guilt card like a master manipulator. "June, you know how much my mom means to me," he pleaded. Those puppy dog eyes that used to melt my heart now only filling me with disgust. "I can't bear the thought of putting her in a home. Please do this for me." Do it for him? After everything he'd done, he had the audacity to ask me for favors? But I knew better than to argue. Larry had a way of twisting words and emotions, using my own fears and insecurities against me. So, like a fool, I agreed. And that's how I found myself spending my days caring for a woman who had never truly accepted me. Evelyn had always been critical of me, making snide remarks about my cooking, my cleaning, my very existence in her son's life. But now, in her more lucid moments, she would reach for my hand, her eyes pleading with me for help, for comfort. It was a twisted game of push and pull, one that left me emotionally and physically drained. One minute she would be cursing my name, calling me a useless burden on her family. The next, she would be begging me to stay, to not leave her alone. Through it all, Larry remained absent, both physically and emotionally. His visits were few and far between, and when he did show up, he was distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere. No doubt he was off gallivanting with Kara, living the life he had always dreamed of, while I was stuck in this living nightmare. The weight of it all was suffocating. I found myself longing for the days when my biggest worry was whether or not Larry would remember to pick up milk on his way home from work. Now, my days were filled with cleaning up messes, administering medication, and trying to reason with a woman who was slowly losing her grip on reality. And yet, despite the challenges, despite the constant barrage of insults and ingratitude, there was a part of me that couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of loyalty to Evelyn. After all, she was the mother of the man I had once loved more than anything in this world. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, that loyalty began to wear thin. Larry's manipulation, his utter disregard for my well-being, had pushed me to the brink of my own sanity. And slowly, a burning desire for revenge began to take root within me. If he thought he could just discard me like a piece of trash, leaving me to care for his ailing mother while he cavorted with his mistress, he had another thing coming. I may have agreed to play the dutiful wife for now, but mark my words, I would have my vengeance, and it would be sweet. The straw that finally broke the camel's back came in the form of a private investigator's report. After months of suspicion and gut-wrenching uncertainty, I finally had the truth laid bare before me. Larry and Kara's sordid affair, complete with dates, times, and locations of their trysts. As I pored over the damning evidence, a strange sense of calm washed over me. There was no more room for doubt, no more excuses to cling to. The betrayal was real, and it cut deeper than any knife ever could. But amidst the pain, a newfound resolve began to take root. I was done being the victim, the dutiful wife who turned a blind eye to her husband's indiscretions. It was time to take action, to reclaim my life and my dignity. First, though, I had to deal with the ever-present thorn in my side. My mother. Bless her heart, she meant well, but her outdated beliefs and unwavering loyalty to the patriarchy were suffocating me. "June, honey, you have to think about this," she pleaded, her voice laced with concern. "A divorce would ruin your family, ruin Larry's life. You need to stand by your man, for better or worse." Stand by my man? The audacity of such a statement made my blood boil. Had she not seen the evidence, the cold, hard proof of his betrayal? "Mom, with all due respect, Larry made his choices," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. "He chose to cheat, to lie, to disrespect our marriage vows. I won't be made a fool of any longer." My mother's eyes widened, taken aback by my newfound assertiveness. But before she could protest further, I held up a hand to silence her. "This is my decision, and it's final. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." With that, I turned on my heel and left her sputtering in the living room. No more excuses, no more justifications. It was time to take control of my life. Over the next few weeks, I worked tirelessly, laying the groundwork for my revenge. I consulted with lawyers, gathered evidence, and made contingency plans. All the while, I played the part of the dutiful wife, lulling Larry into a false sense of security. And then, when the time was right, I struck. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon when I called Larry into the living room, a stack of papers clutched in my hand. He ambled in, unsuspecting, that dopey grin on his face that used to make my heart flutter. "What's up, honey?" he asked, plopping down on the couch. Without a word, I tossed the stack of papers onto his lap. Divorce papers, already filled out and signed by me. Larry's eyes widened in shock as he flipped through the pages, realization dawning on his face. "June, what is this? You can't be serious." "Oh, but I am," I replied, my voice cold and steady. "You brought this on yourself, Larry. Now it's time to face the consequences." As he scrambled to his feet, pleading and begging for another chance, I simply turned my back and walked away. No more words needed to be said. The die had been cast, and there was no turning back. Revenge, it seemed, would be mine after all. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. As I stood in the living room, facing Larry and Kara, it was like a scene straight out of a twisted drama. The two of them, huddled together on the couch, their faces etched with a mixture of guilt and defiance. "June, please," Larry began, his voice trembling. "Let's talk about this. We can work things out." "Work things out?" A bitter laugh escaped my lips as I shook my head in disbelief. "Work things out? You really have some nerve, Larry." I turned my gaze towards Kara, who couldn't even meet my eyes. "And you, my supposed best friend, How could you do this to me? Kara mumbled something under her breath, but I held up a hand to silence her. Save it. I don't want to hear any more of your lies. Larry rose to his feet, desperation written all over his face. June, think about this. A divorce would ruin me. My career, my reputation, everything would be destroyed. For a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed my mind. Was I really ready to upend our lives like this? But then I remembered the pain, the betrayal, the countless nights spent crying myself to sleep, and that doubt evaporated like smoke. That's not my problem anymore, Larry, I said, my voice steely with resolve. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. Kara finally found her voice, her eyes brimming with tears. June, please. We never meant to hurt you. It just happened. It just happened? I repeated incredulously. You betrayed me in the worst possible way, and you have the audacity to make excuses? I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, a white-hot rage that had been simmering for months. You know what, Kara? You're not my friend anymore. Why, in fact, you're nothing to me. Both of you can go to hell. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight, suffocating us all with their finality. Larry opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off before he could start. Don't even try it, Larry. This is over. Done. Finished. I want you out of this house by the end of the day. Kara let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. Larry, on the other hand, simply stared at me in stunned silence, as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. June, please, he tried again, desperation seeping into his voice. I'll do anything. Just don't do this. But I was done listening, done making excuses for his behavior. With a shake of my head, I turned and walked away, leaving them to their misery. As I climbed the stairs, each step felt lighter, as if a massive weight was being lifted from my shoulders. The lies, the deceit, the constant sense of betrayal, it was all finally behind me. In that moment, I knew that no matter what came next, I would be okay. I had survived the unthinkable, and I had emerged stronger, more resilient than ever before. Larry and Kara may have thought they had won, but in the end, it was me who had reclaimed my power, my dignity, and my life. And as I closed the bedroom door behind me, I couldn't help but smile. Revenge, it seemed, was truly a dish best served cold. The next few hours were a blur of activity, punctuated by the sounds of shouting and slamming doors. True to my word, I was kicking Larry out of our home, and he was not going quietly. June, please, let's talk about this, he pleaded, his voice a mixture of desperation and anger. You can't just throw me out on the street. I steeled myself against his protests, focusing instead on the task at hand. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I began gathering his belongings, clothes, books, personal effects, and tossing them haphazardly into boxes and bags. June, stop this madness, he shouted, grabbing my arm in a futile attempt to halt my progress. Think about what you're doing. I twisted out of his grasp, my eyes blazing with a fury I had never felt before. Don't you dare touch me, Larry. You lost that right a long time ago. Kara, bless her soul, had wisely chosen to remove herself from the situation, retreating to who knows where, but even her absence couldn't dampen the raging fire within me. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The chance to excise the cancer that had been slowly poisoning my life. With each item I packed, each memory I boxed away, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. This was my home, my sanctuary, and I would be damned if I let Larry's betrayal taint it any longer. June, please, I'm begging you, he tried again, his voice cracking with emotion. I can make things right, I swear. Just give me another chance. Another chance? The absurdity of his request nearly made me laugh out loud. How many chances had I given him already, only to have them thrown back in my face? You had your chance, Larry, I said, my voice cold and unwavering, and you blew it. Now it's time to face the consequences. As if on cue, the doorbell rang, and I felt a surge of relief wash over me. Angela, my best friend and confidant, had arrived, not a moment too soon. I opened the door to find her standing there, a look of steely determination on her face. Without a word, she brushed past me and made her way towards Larry, who was still pleading his case. You heard the lady, Angela said, her voice leaving no room for argument. It's time for you to go. Larry's eyes widened as he took in her imposing presence. For a moment I thought he might try to argue, but one look from Angela seemed to drain him of his fight. Fine, he spat, his voice dripping with bitterness. But this isn't over, June. Not by a long shot. With that, he gathered up the boxes and bags, shooting me one last venomous glare before storming out the door and slamming it behind him. As the echoes of his departure faded, I felt myself sag against the wall, the weight of the past few hours finally catching up to me. Angela was at my side in an instant, her arms wrapped around me in a comforting embrace. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. "You did the right thing. He's gone, and you're free." And in that moment, as I clung to my friend, I knew she was right. The battle had been won, and the war was finally over. Larry was gone, banished from my life, and I could finally begin to heal. Revenge, it seemed, was a dish best served piping hot. The months that followed were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional upheaval, but through it all, I remained steadfast in my resolve. Larry thought he could walk away scot-free, but he had another thing coming. With the help of a tenacious lawyer, I went after him for everything he had, alimony, assets, you name it. And in the end, my perseverance paid off. The judge saw right through Larry's lies and awarded me a hefty settlement, one that would ensure I could start my new life on solid financial footing. But the true victory, the sweetest revenge, came in the form of Kara's downfall. Karma, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. It all started when Kara's new boyfriend, some poor schmuck she had sunk her claws into, caught wind of her sordid affair with Larry. Needless to say, he was less than thrilled about being played for a fool. "You lying, deceitful snake," he shouted, his voice carrying across the restaurant where they had been having a romantic dinner. "How could you do this to me?" Kara, for all her manipulative ways, was clearly caught off guard. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, unable to conjure up one of her trademark excuses. I can explain," she stammered, her eyes darting around the room in panic. But her boyfriend wasn't having any of it. With a shake of his head, he pushed away from the table and stormed out, leaving Kara to face the scrutiny of the other diners alone. As word of her betrayal spread through our social circles, Kara found herself increasingly ostracized. Friends who had once fawned over her suddenly wanted nothing to do with her. Even her own family seemed to turn their backs, ashamed of her actions. And through it all, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. Payback, it seemed, was a dish best served ice cold. As for me, I was slowly but surely piecing my life back together. With Angela's unwavering support, I had moved into her spare bedroom, using it as a temporary home base while I figured out my next steps. It was during those long nights, huddled together on the couch with a bottle of wine and endless episodes of trashy reality TV, that the idea began to take shape. A business, one that would help other women like me, women who had been betrayed, belittled, and beaten down by the men in their lives. With Angela's encouragement, I took the leap, pouring my savings and settlement money into launching a boutique consulting firm. Our mission? To empower women, to help them find their strength and reclaim their lives after heartbreak and betrayal. It was a risky move, but one that paid off in spades. Word of our services spread like wildfire, and before long we had a thriving client base of women from all walks of life, each one seeking the same thing: revenge. And as I sat in my sunny office, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of a successful business, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I had taken the ultimate revenge on Larry and Kara. I had built a life for myself, one that was infinitely better than anything they could have ever offered me. As for them, well, let's just say that karma has a way of evening the score. And in the end, it was me who emerged victorious, with a newfound strength and resilience that no one could ever take away. Revenge, it seemed, was a dish best served with a side of empowerment and a heaping helping of success. Matthew scrutinized the divorce papers and smirked. "Really, Lisa? You think you'll make it on your own? Without me, you're nothing." His words stung, but I wouldn't let him see it. I kept my expression firm, biting back the retort on the tip of my tongue. Instead, I took a deep breath and assessed the living room. It was a typical suburban home in a mid-sized American city. Everything was incredibly well organized, a stark contrast to Matthew's perpetual messiness. I broke the silence. "We'll see about that." Matthew laughed, tossing the papers onto the coffee table. "You've never been on your own? You think you can just leave?" "I'm not thinking, Matthew. I'm doing it." He shrugged, picking up his phone and scrolling through it lazily. Go ahead. You'll come crawling back when you realize you can't handle it. Ignoring him, I moved to the kitchen, the one safe space left in the house. Memories of happier times cluttered my mind every time I stepped through the door. The kitchen was like a parallel universe compared to Matthew's chaos, the harmony amid discord. As I filled the kettle, I heard the low murmur of Matthew's voice from the living room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tiptoed to the doorway. Yeah, she's finally taking the bait, Matthew said, his voice muffled as he spoke into the phone. Really thought she was something, but she's about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Can't even keep up with the simplest tasks. My stomach churned. The person I had spent years supporting, laughing with, and loving was selling me short to his friends like I was some joke. Determined to keep my emotions in check, I focused on pouring the hot water over my tea bag, watching the steam curl upward. Matthew's voice grew louder. She thinks she's got this big plan to leave me and start fresh. Honestly, it's pathetic. Once a quitter, always a quitter. The words cut through me, each one a tiny jab that threatened to bring tears to my eyes. I held my breath, willing myself not to cry. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I returned to the living room, teacup in hand. You done making your little jokes? Matthew hung up the phone, not even bothering to disguise his irritation. Were you eavesdropping? I didn't need to eavesdrop to know what you think of me. He shrugged. You're oversensitive. It's just harmless banter. Harmless? I echoed. You're belittling me to your friends. They know the truth about you. Maybe you should start accepting it, too. He grabbed his jacket and headed toward the door. I'm going out. Don't wait up. The door closed with a finality that echoed in our strangely silent house. I watched him leave, each step he took away opening a small window of relief in my chest. When the headlights of his car vanished down the street, I exhaled deeply, sipping my now lukewarm tea. This was my test, my chance to prove him wrong. For too long, I'd allowed Matthew to dictate the terms of my life, convincing myself I was nothing without him. But now, it's time to be something more. I walked to the living room, grabbed the divorce papers, and sat at the desk with a pen in hand. I felt a surge of determination, this time different. This time, it was real. I signed my name with purpose, each stroke of the pen a declaration of independence. I'm not nothing, Matthew. I'm just beginning. I stared at the signature on the divorce papers, feeling a strange mix of resolve and uncertainty, but there was no turning back now. As I moved the papers aside, memories of our early days flooded back, uninvited. Matthew and I met at work. He was charismatic, effortlessly charming everyone around him. I was drawn to that magnetism, almost helplessly. Our romance was whirlwind, filled with grand gestures and sweet promises. Early on, we were inseparable. I left my job to support his career, convinced by his words and my own naive belief that it was for the best. Helping Matthew at work started small. A few emails here, a report there. Soon I was practically running his department from behind the scenes. He'd prop up the image while I managed the reality. Our professional dynamics evolved, except it wasn't evolution, it was exploitation. I recalled a recent conversation with one of his old coworkers, Cam. We ran into each other at a grocery store. Hey, Lisa. Long time no see, Cam greeted, throwing some vegetables into his cart. What have you been up to these days? I forced a smile. Oh, still helping Matthew with his work. You know how it is. Cam's eye roll was slight but noticeable. Yeah, everyone knows how it is with Matthew. The guy's a legend in his own mind. I frowned. What do you mean? He's always talking about how he runs the show. Calls himself a genius, but we all know who's really doing the work. I forced a laugh. Oh, you know Matthew, always boasting. Cam leaned in, whispering conspiratorially. Actually, some folks say he takes credit for your work. Heard it more than once around the office. The conversation stayed with me, gnawing at my sense of loyalty and justice. Over time, Matthew's reliance on me didn't breed gratitude but contempt. He treated me like his personal assistant, his condescending attitude growing more frequent. Each task I handled, every problem I solved, felt like another nail in the coffin of our supposed partnership. Days after that grocery store encounter, I was at Matthew's office, dropping off some paperwork he had conveniently forgotten. As I waited, I overheard snippets of a hushed conversation between two of his colleagues in the break room. You hear about Matthew's latest screw-up? One asked, chuckling. Which one? Seems like there's a new one every week. Guy's useless without Lisa, the other replied. My blood boiled, but I walked away quickly, pretending I hadn't heard. Pretending had seemed easier back then. Sitting now in my quiet kitchen, I realized just how deeply the facade went, how much I had buried to keep the peace. I could no longer ignore the extent of Matthew's disrespect. He had built his success on my efforts and derided me behind my back. I picked up my phone and dialed Rebecca, my lawyer and longtime friend. Her voice was a lifeline. Rebecca, it's time, I said, my voice steady. All right, Lisa. I'll start the paperwork. We'll get this done. Clicking off, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Empowerment. The next step in my journey was clear. This was just the beginning, and Matthew had no idea what was coming. I folded the last of the laundry and heard the front door slam. Matthew was home early, which was never a good sign. He stormed into the living room, his face flushed with anger. Lisa, he barked, get in here. I walked in, my hands still slightly damp from the laundry. What's wrong? He held up his phone, shoving it in my face. Why did someone tell me you were snooping around at my office? I took a step back. I wasn't snooping, Matthew. I went to drop off those papers like you asked. Yeah. And what else did you do? Gossip with my coworkers? Try to undermine me? I leveled my gaze at him. Undermine you? You don't need my help for that. He glared at me, his eyes darkening. Watch it, Lisa. I can ruin you. I've already signed the divorce papers, Matthew. You think you can still scare me? He threw his hands up in the air. Papers mean nothing. You'll crawl back when you realize you can't handle life without me. The doorbell rang, breaking the tense silence. I opened the door to find Cam standing there, looking uncomfortable. Hey, Lisa, can I talk to you for a second? Sure, Cam, what's up? Cam glanced past me at Matthew, who was still fuming. I think you should know something. Matthew's been talking a lot of trash about you at work. Matthew scoffed from the couch. Oh, here we go. Ignoring Matthew, Cam continued. He says you're incompetent, that you can't handle anything on your own. My heart pounded. I know he's been bad-mouthing me. I've heard it before. Cam shifted uneasily. It's worse than that. Matthew's been flirting with Karen Blake. More than flirting, actually. I looked at Matthew, who was trying and failing to act nonchalant. Karen? Really, Matthew? What? He said, feigning innocence. She's just a friend. Yeah, a friend. A friend who sends you heart emojis and late-night texts. I shot back, my voice rising. Matthew's eyes narrowed. Don't pretend to be the victim here. You're overreacting. Karen's harmless. Cam stepped in. Actually, I saw them together. They looked pretty cozy during that business dinner last week. I turned to Matthew. Care to explain? He rolled his eyes. It was a business dinner. Get over it. I couldn't believe him. My mind raced, piecing together the lies, the disrespect, the sheer arrogance. I needed proof, and I needed it fast. I'm done, Matthew. This marriage is over, and you know it. He smirked. Good luck. You'll never manage without me. I stared at him, the man I'd devoted years of my life to, and felt only cold resolve. We'll see about that. As he stormed out, I thanked Cam for confirming what I already suspected. Knowing Matthew's true colors gave me the fuel I needed. I started gathering evidence, documenting everything. His texts, his meetings, even looking through his finances. I had pictures of him and Karen at various outings. His secrets were unraveling, and with each new piece of information, I realized how little I actually knew Matthew. But it wasn't just about exposing his infidelity. It was about taking back control. I called Rebecca again, sharing my discoveries. She listened, understanding the full weight of what I had uncovered. We'll use this, Lisa, she assured me. This will solidify your case. I hung up, feeling a strange sense of calm. This was no longer about just leaving. This was about getting my life back from a man who had taken too much from me. As I put away my phone, I promised myself that Matthew's reign of manipulation would end, one way or another. I sat at my desk, the cold blue glow of my laptop screen lighting up the documents and pictures scattered around me. Each piece of evidence felt like a step closer to reclaiming my life. Matthew's texts, financial records, and photos with Karen all painted a clear picture. He had underestimated me, and that was about to be his downfall. Rebecca met me the next day at a quiet cafe. I spread the documents out on the table between us. This is solid, she said, flipping through the evidence. Matthew really let his guard down. He thinks I'm still that naive woman he married, I replied, my voice steady. Rebecca smiled. But you're so much more than that now. This will help us build a strong case for your divorce. We spent the next hour strategizing, discussing how to use this evidence to counteract any claims Matthew might make. The plan was coming together, and I felt more confident by the minute. Back home, I knew the next step was to hit Matthew where it hurt. His job. I accessed the company's systems, leveraging my knowledge from years of running things behind the scenes. I started small, ensuring vital information was missing or incorrect. It wouldn't be traceable back to me, but the effects would be noticeable. Days later, Matthew came home, visibly agitated. Work was a nightmare today, he grumbled, throwing his jacket onto the couch. Really? I asked innocently. What happened? Some crucial data went missing. Then we discovered a bunch of errors in the reports. It's chaos. I nodded, suppressing a smile. Sounds tough. You have no idea, he said, rubbing his temples, and I'm the one who's going to take the fall if this isn't fixed. That night I continued to sabotage his work, planting seeds for more chaos. The next week he came home fuming. Lisa, everything's falling apart. He paced the living room, panic clearly etched on his face. Every time we fix one problem, 2 more pop up. Strange, I replied, barely containing my satisfaction. Maybe you should look at your team's performance. Deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before his incompetence would be exposed. I just had to keep pushing. One evening, as Matthew was out, I sat down with Rebecca to finalize my plans. The divorce papers were one thing, but we needed the perfect timing to ensure everything would collapse simultaneously. Focus on the next big project he's handling, Rebecca advised. If we can create enough disruption there, the fallout will be catastrophic for him. I nodded, understanding the significance. This was more than revenge. This was my liberation. I'll make it happen. The big project was a merger deal Matthew had been bragging about for weeks. I accessed critical documents and altered key details, ensuring he wouldn't notice until it was too late. As the deadline approached, Matthew's panic grew. The night before the final presentation, he was frantically reviewing his notes. Why isn't any of this making sense? He muttered, eyes darting over the papers. I watched him with a calm, detached demeanor. You're probably just tired, I offered. Maybe sleep on it. Sleep with this mess? He stomped off to his study, leaving me alone in the living room. Early the next morning, Rebecca texted me. Ready? I replied. More than ready. I took the divorce papers from the drawer, every line of ink a testament to my resolve. Today, Matthew's world would crumble, and I would be there to watch it fall, stronger and freer than I'd been in years. This was my turn to rise. The morning light filtered through the blinds as I sipped my coffee, awaiting the inevitable fallout at Matthew's office. The merger deal was set to be finalized today, and I knew the errors I'd planted would come to light like a ticking time bomb. Around midday, my phone buzzed. It was Rebecca. It's happening. I just got word from a friend at the company. The project's blown up in his face. I felt a surge of satisfaction. Perfect. I'll be ready. An hour later, Matthew burst through the door, his face a mask of fury and desperation. Everything's gone to hell, he spat, flinging his briefcase against the wall. The merger is dead. Dead! They're blaming me for the failures. I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. What do you mean? What do I mean? He shouted, pacing like a caged animal. We lost crucial files. The figures were all wrong. They think I sabotaged it. Maybe you should have double-checked everything, I said calmly. It's your responsibility, isn't it? He whipped around, eyes blazing. You don't understand, Lisa. This could ruin me. I met his gaze, unflinching. Maybe you should have thought about that before treating everyone, including me, like they're beneath you. His anger shifted to a sneer. You think you're so special? Signing those divorce papers doesn't make you independent. You'll come crawling back, mark my words. I stood up, walking over to the desk and picking up the divorce papers. Actually, Matthew, I brought them for you to sign. Given your current predicament, I'd say the timing is perfect. He laughed bitterly. You think these papers mean anything? You're nothing without me. We'll see about that. I placed the papers firmly in front of him. Sign them, Matthew. He grabbed a pen, his hand shaking with rage, and scrawled his name angrily across the bottom. I gathered the papers, feeling an overwhelming sense of triumph. At that moment, his phone buzzed incessantly with calls. He ignored it, glaring at me instead. "You think this is over? You'll regret this. Mark my words." I stayed silent, my resolve unshaken. He stormed out, leaving the house in turmoil, his world crumbling around him. That night, I sat quietly in the living room, absorbing the moment. The weight on my shoulders felt lighter. The next steps were clear. I needed to finalize the divorce and reclaim my life in full. A few days later, the news broke at Matthew's company. He was publicly reprimanded, demoted from his high-ranking position. The scandal of the botched merger rippled through the company, leaving his reputation in tatters. Matthew's calls grew desperate, but I ignored them. Finally, he appeared at the door again, a shadow of his former self. "Lisa, this is all a misunderstanding. We can fix this. You and me, like old times." I looked at him, seeing the man who once held me captive under his thumb, now reduced to pleading. "There are no old times, Matthew, only what's next. And for me, that doesn't include you." As he stood there, dumbfounded, I closed the door on him, and that part of my life, for good. This was the end of Matthew's reign over me, but just the beginning of my true independence. I had torn down the walls of my old life and was finally stepping into my own, no longer confined by his manipulations. The future was mine, built on my terms. The news of Matthew's public demotions spread like wildfire. His once admired reputation crumbled, and the fallout from the botched merger left him ostracized at work. I could almost hear the collective sigh of relief from his coworkers. A week later, I walked into the office of David Walsh, my former boss. He greeted me with a warm smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Lisa, it's been too long. Sit down, let's catch up." I took a seat, feeling the weight of the past weeks lift slightly. "Thanks for seeing me, David." "Are you kidding? We've missed you around here," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I heard about what happened with Matthew. How are you holding up?" "I'm doing better, actually. It's been tough, but it's also been a wake-up call. I'm ready to get back into the workforce." David nodded, his expression serious. "Matthew never appreciated what he had in you, Lisa. You were always the backbone, and it's about time you got the recognition you deserve." "Thank you, David. I have a lot to offer, and I'm ready to prove it." "Good," he said, leaning forward. "How would you feel about coming back on board? We need someone with your skills and experience." My heart leapt. "I'd love that. I'm more than ready." As we discussed the details, a sense of liberation washed over me. This was the turning point I had been waiting for, a chance to rebuild not only my career, but my entire life. Back home, I started job hunting in earnest, sending out resumes and setting up interviews. I reconnected with former colleagues, each conversation a reminder of my capabilities and talents. The process was invigorating, a stark contrast to the stifling environment I had endured with Matthew. Meanwhile, Matthew's desperation grew. He called repeatedly, each message more frantic than the last. "Lisa, please call me back. We need to talk. I can fix this." I ignored him, focusing on my own path. One evening, as I prepared for an interview, Matthew showed up at the door again, looking haggard. "Lisa, you have to help me," he pleaded. I crossed my arms, standing firm. "Help you? After everything you've done?" "You don't understand. They're transferring me to a dead-end position. My career is over." I felt a flicker of pity, but quickly smothered it. "That's your problem, not mine. You made your bed, Matthews. Now you have to lie in it." His face twisted in anger. "You'll regret this, Lisa. You think you're better off without me, but you'll see. You'll come crawling back." I shook my head, closing the door on his threats. "Goodbye, Matthew." The next weeks flew by. I landed a prestigious role at a new company, my skills and resilience impressing my new boss. The sense of accomplishment was exhilarating, each day a reminder that I was capable and deserving of success. Matthew, on the other hand, continued to spiral downward. The transfer to a trivial position sealed his professional downfall, and his reputation was beyond repair. He tried to take legal action, desperate to hold on to the last shreds of his former life, but Rebecca and I were prepared. We had the evidence, the paperwork, and the resolve to see it through. In our final confrontation, he attempted to get Lisa back through legal means, but I revealed all the documentation. "You're finished, Matthew," I said with a calm finality. "I've moved on. It's time you do the same." With each passing day, I felt stronger, vindicated. I had not only reclaimed my career, but my sense of self. Matthew's downfall was complete, a testament to his own deceit and arrogance. As I flourished in my new role, his life continued to unravel. This was my victory, my liberation, and as I moved forward, I knew the future was mine to shape, free from the shadows of the past. I was on my way home from work, feeling blissfully tired after a fulfilling day at my new job, when I received a call from Rebecca. "Lisa, we've got a problem. Matthew is trying to contest the divorce. He's claiming you manipulated him into signing the papers." I pulled into my driveway, gripping the steering wheel. "He's desperate, Rekka. Are we prepared to handle this?" "Absolutely, but it means another court date. He's not letting go easily." "All right," I said, my voice steady. "I'll be ready." The court date arrived quicker than I expected. Matthew looked haggard, but his eyes were filled with defiance as he sat across from me. His lawyer stood up first, spouting allegations that made my blood boil. Miss Hartman exploited Mr. Hartman's emotional state, coercing him into signing the divorce papers, the lawyer declared, pointing at me with undue dramatics. I whispered to Rebecca, "This is nonsense." Rebecca nodded. "Let me handle this." She stood, her voice level but firm. "Your Honor, we have ample evidence that Mr. Hartman willingly signed the divorce papers with full understanding. Moreover, we have documentation proving his ulterior motives and abusive behavior throughout the marriage." Matthew scoffed. "She's lying. I was under immense pressure. None of this is fair." The judge eyed Matthew skeptically. "Mr. Hartman, your claims lack substantial evidence. Based on the provided documents and testimonies, it's clear that Miss Hartman has grounds for divorce." I watched as the realization hit him. His face twisted in anger. "You'll regret this, Lisa. Mark my words. This isn't over." I stood my ground, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. "Actually, it is over, Matthew." The judge finalized the divorce, and I walked out of the courtroom feeling lighter, the weight of our toxic marriage finally lifted from my shoulders. A few weeks after the court ruling, I learned that Matthew had been transferred to a menial position in a remote office. His life had unraveled completely, a stark contrast to his former arrogance. One evening, as I reviewed files for a big project, my phone rang. It was David. "Lisa, I have some great news. We're promoting you to lead the new strategic planning division. Your work has been outstanding." I could hardly contain my excitement. "Thank you, David. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," he replied warmly. "Congratulations, Lisa. You've earned this." My career was thriving, and my life was finally coming together. That night, I celebrated with close friends, toasting to new beginnings and the strength to overcome past struggles. Meanwhile, Matthew's life continued its downward spiral. His arrogance had led to his downfall, and there was no one left to clean up his messes. He was left to face the consequences of his actions alone. As I looked around at my friends, I felt a deep sense of gratitude and triumph. I had reclaimed my life, my career, and my dignity. The shadow of Matthew's toxic presence had faded, replaced by the bright possibilities of the future. The final showdown with Matthew was over, and I had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever. The path ahead was mine to walk, free from manipulation and deceit. For the first time in years, I felt a profound sense of peace. The drama, the revenge, and the struggle had all led me to this moment, and I was ready to embrace every opportunity that came my way, confident in who I had become. I spent the next weeks settling into my new role, thus flourishing in a supportive environment that valued my contributions. Life was finally coming together. One Saturday morning, I was tidying up when the doorbell rang. Answering it, I was surprised to find Matthew's mother, Eleanor, and his sister, Nancy, standing there, looking somber. "Lisa, we need to talk," Eleanor said with an edge in her voice. I stepped aside, motioning them into the living room. "Come in." Once seated, Eleanor wasted no time. "How could you do this to Matthew? He's family. You're tearing us apart." Nancy chimed in, her tone accusatory. "You abandoned him when he needed you the most. What kind of person does that?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "You both have no idea what I went through. Matthew's lies, his manipulations, and his affairs were too much to bear." Eleanor's face hardened. "He's your husband. You made vows to stand by him." I held her gaze. "And he broke those vows repeatedly. Why should I stay with a man who treats me like I'm nothing?" Nancy crossed her arms. "We've known Matthew longer than you, Lisa. He needs love and support, not betrayal." Support, I laughed bitterly, like how he supported me by belittling my efforts and taking credit for my work. Eleanor looked taken aback, but she wasn't giving up. People make mistakes. Families forgive. There's a limit, Eleanor, I said firmly. Matthew's arrogance and deceit are his downfall, not my doing. Nancy finally dropped her confrontational stance, seeming to remember who I was to Matthew once, before everything fell apart. What happened, Lisa? He wasn't always this way. I sighed, feeling a mix of old pains and new strength. No, he wasn't. But power corrupted him, and he lost sight of what we had. I couldn't save him from himself. Eleanor's face softened slightly. We didn't know it was that bad. But you must understand, he's still our family. I understand, I replied, my voice softer but resolved. But I had to choose my well-being over his dysfunction. I hope you can, too. The room fell silent. Eleanor and Nancy exchanged looks, but said nothing more. They got up to leave, Eleanor pausing at the door. We'll always care about you, Lisa, but this is hard for us to accept. I know, I said, holding back a wave of complex emotions. And I appreciate that, but I had to do what was right for me. As they left, I felt a sense of closure. The confrontation had opened old wounds, but it confirmed my choices. I returned to my desk, looking at the projects awaiting me. My life was moving forward, and I could feel its pace quickening in ways that excited rather than overwhelmed me. Reflecting on my journey, I recognized my transformation. From a supportive wife lost in her husband's shadow, I had become an independent individual charting her own path. I had faced manipulation, deceit, and familial conflict, and had come out stronger on the other side. With a deep breath, I tidied up the remaining reminders of my past, consigning them to a box that would be stored away. My future was now full of potential, unclouded by the failures and betrayals that once held me back. I smiled, feeling a wave of contentment wash over me. The final ties to my past were cut. The world awaited, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. This was my new beginning, built on my terms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine sense of peace and purpose.